What's up, party people? It's me, Dwight D. Eisenhower, 34th President of the United States of America. Hailing from my hometown of Denison, Texas, I was mostly raised in Kansas with my large Pennsylvania Dutch family. Now, as for what party I stood for, well, I always like to say that I'd be down for any type of party, but I mostly stayed Republican in my ventures. Now, I attended the West Point Military Academy, where I received my Bachelor of Science and then immediately went off to serve my country in World War II, even serving as Brigadier General. Not too shabby. After some time spent in the military, I came home and served in some other positions, like the first Supreme Commander of NATO. But in 1952, I decided I wanted a little bit more spice in my life, so I ran for the President of the United States of America. I ran for the first time against the Democrat, Aldi Stevenson. We debated many issues, me and Mr. Stevenson, but the three greatest issues in our election were keeping America out of communism, ending the Korean War, and restricting labor unions. I absolutely destroyed Aldi, as you can see on this here map, 442 to 89 electoral votes, and took office at the ripe young age of 62. Now, 4 years later, I decided that again I wanted to run for president, and so I did. The election of 1956, me and Aldi Stevenson debated many of the same issues, including communism and labor workforces. This time, I beat him again because apparently he didn't learn in 1952 that you don't mess with Dwight without a fight. Just look at the electoral map from 1956. That's a whole lot of red. This time, I won by an even greater margin, 457 to 73. Now that I've talked about how I thoroughly gave Aldi Stevenson these hands in the elections, let's talk about what I did as president. Now, I got into office and immediately started laying down the long arm of the law. I told North and South Korea to stop fighting like a bunch of little children and end the war. Once they heard old Dwighty D wanted to end the war, they did it immediately, resulting in the partition of Korea, how it is today, and a nice armistice. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of the biggest pains in my side as president, the filthy communists. When I took office, we were in the middle of a war with the Russians, a very cold war indeed. But during my time in office, we never actually fought the Russians like pew-pew. I kept us out of that conflict, even through some road bumps like the U-2 debacle. Now, after some scuffling in the Middle East relating to the Suez Canal, I issued the Eisenhower Doctrine, a very fine hunk of policy which allowed Middle East countries to request aid from the United States if they were being threatened by armed aggression. I used this to help my pals out in Jordan and prevent a communist grip in the area. Nice. This was probably one of my greatest pieces of policy, if we're being no cap here. Now, another really cool thing I did in office was admit Hawaii and Alaska as official states of the Union. And who doesn't love Alaska and Hawaii? Hawaii with their beaches and nice tourist destinations, and Alaska with their... Moving on to something that doesn't involve other countries, NASA. I founded the program during my time in office, which went on to become a pretty sick organization and put men on the moon, before the communists, I might add. I sunk funding into this program because, as you know, we were at odds with the communists, and I wanted to kick their butts when it came to space travel. Now, the final cool thing I did during my 8-year tenure as president is sign the first civil rights bill since the end of Reconstruction to protect the rights of African Americans, the Civil Rights Act of 1957. And then I did it again in 1960 with the Civil Rights Act of 1960. Although the Congress did make the bills much weaker than I had initially intended them to be, they both still passed and allowed for more rights for African Americans. Now, one cool thing I did for my fellow future presidents is I expanded the power of the president by expanding the power of the CIA to spy on the commie. Now, while this originally was used to keep us out of war, the presidents now use the CIA to spy on the American people and steal their information. But we keep that on the DL. Oh wow, look at the time. I got a blast. So I'm going to hand it over to my mans in Congress, Sam Rayburn.
Hello, I'm Sam Rayburn. I'm the 43rd Speaker of the House, representing Texas's 4th Congressional District as a Democrat. I also hold the record for longest tenure serving, over 17 years. I was born in Rowan County, Tennessee in 1882. That's enough about me. Let's talk about Congress. At the beginning of the first session of the 84th Congress, the Senate had 48 Democratic members, 47 Republican members, and 1 independent. At the end, Senate had 47 Democratic members and 49 Republican members. In the House, there were 231 Democratic members and 203 Republican members. At the end, the House had 228 Democratic members and 200 Republican members. The Speaker of the House is me, and the Senate Majority Leader is Lyndon B. Johnson. The previous Congress, the 83rd, served during the first 2 years of Eisenhower's presidency. The Senate started the first session with 47 Democratic members and one independent and 48 Republicans. The Senate ended with the same numbers. The House started with 211 Democratic members and one independent. They also had 221 Republican candidates. The House ended with 212 Democratic candidates, one independent, and 213 Republican candidates. The Speaker of the House for the 83rd Congress was Joseph William Martin Jr., and the Senate Majority Leader was Robert A. Taft. Next is the 85th Congress, whose Senate started with 49 Democratic members and 47 Republican members. The Senate ended with 50 Democratic members and 45 Republican members. The House began with 233 Democratic members and 200 Republican members. The House ended with 232 Democratic members and 193 Republican members. The Speaker of the House was obviously me, and the Senate Majority Leader was Lyndon B. Johnson. The last Congress of Eisenhower's presidency was the 86th Congress. The 86th Senate started with 64 Democratic members and 34 Republican members. The Senate ended with 66 Democratic members and the same amount of Republicans. The House began with 282 Democratic members and 153 Republican members. The House ended with 281 Democratic members and 151 Republican members. The Speaker of the House was, of course, me, and the Senate Majority Leader was Lyndon B. Johnson. Alright, now that I've given you a breakdown of Congress, let's talk about the most important bills passed by us. First is the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which was the first civil rights legislation since the Reconstruction. The bill empowered the government to prosecute individuals who interfered with others' right to vote. Second, we admitted Alaska as a state, which brought us oil and became our 49th state. Third, we admitted Hawaii as a state, which became our 50th state. Fourth, we passed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. The act constructed a 41,000-mile network of interstate highways, and the budget was $26 billion. Fifth, we passed the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act of 1960. The act was the first to have 5 uses of national forests in one law. The law directs the Secretary of Agriculture to develop renewable resources to keep up with the growing needs for the nation. That's all I have for you today. So now I'm going to pass it off to my good friend, Chief Justice Warren.
Yo, it's me, Chief Justice Earl Warren. I was one of 5 justices that my man Dwight D. appointed to the Supreme Court. In September of 1953, the previous Chief Justice, Fred Vincent, died. Quick moment of silence for my boy. Okay, so then Dwight D. was like, yo, you're a model Republican, I'ma nominate you. He liked how I had lots of experience in politics, being a district attorney, attorney general of Cali, governor of Cali. Then on October 4th, 1953, I became the Chief Justice as a recess appointment, and then I was finally confirmed by the Senate by a voice vote on March 1st, 1954. I served until I died on July 9th, 1974. Rip me. Now to my other Republican boys Dwight D. nominated to the Supreme Court. First is John Marshall Harlan. Eisenhower nominated my boy, and then unlike almost any other previous nomination, the Senate Judiciary Committee brought him in to look at his judicial reviews. He was confirmed on March 17, 1955 by a 71-11 vote, so you know he's great. Every other nomination after him has had to go in front of the Judiciary Committee, so this guy really had a big impact on the Supreme Court, you know? My guy served until he decided to retire on September 23rd, 1971 because he had spinal cancer. So sad. Next is William Brennan. Eisenhower made this previous New Jersey Supreme Court Justice a recess appointment to my Supreme Court in 1956 in order to appeal to left-leaning Republican voters. He was then confirmed by the Senate in 1957 by a voice vote, just like this guy. He retired from the Supreme Court in 1990 due to his declining health. During his time, he wrote over 1,200 opinions for the court. What a goat. Third is Charles Evan Whitaker. After Dwight D. had appointed my boy to a couple district courts, Dwight thought he was finally ready for the big leagues and nominated him for the Supreme Court. He was confirmed by the Senate on March 19, 1957 by a voice vote. Sadly, though, he struggled with depression and retired in 1962 after a nervous breakdown. That's sad, man. Last but not least is Potter Stewart. Dwight made this longtime lawyer and a guy who was on the circuit court a recess appointment. Then he was confirmed by the Senate as a 70-15 vote on March 5, 1959. He retired from the court in 1981 to spend more time with his grandkids. What a great man. Now to a few of our cases. We had some big ones. First, look what we got here. Brown versus the Board of Education. This was the coming together of a bunch of cases coming up in a bunch of states on segregation in school. They said segregation violated the 14th Amendment. My boys and I looked at the case and unanimously said, but separate but equal for racial minorities is actually unequal and violated the 14th Amendment. I decided to use language that all Americans could understand when giving this decision because I wanted all Americans to understand. After that, there was Brown versus the Board of Education 2, where we decided how we would implement Brown 1. We decided that it would get done real fast, like as fast as possible fast, otherwise known as Stephen Nozick fast. We gave a lot of responsibility for this quick action to the local and state govs. Next here, we got Monroe versus Pape. So a bunch of police officers broke into Monroe's Chicago apartment and made Monroe and his wife stand naked in the living room. What? Ransacked the apartment and then was held for like 10 hours without a warrant or permission to call a lawyer. Man, that's awful. Monroe said, nah, bro, that's against the Civil Rights Act, and Chicago said to him, nah, bro, it doesn't. So then it came to us, and this thing was weird, bro. We said that the police actions were against the Civil Rights Act, but a municipality can't be held liable under it. So then we had to write up a big paper explaining authorized versus unauthorized deprivation of rights. A fourth big case we had was Pennsylvania versus Nelson. A commie named Nelson violated the Pennsylvania Sedition Act, which was enacted before we made the Smith Act in Congress. So then it came to us to decide whether the state or federal law was greater. We obviously said that the federal law was greater than the Pennsylvania law, and the Pennsylvania law wasn't allowed. But we still did not want the commies, so we said that they were dealing with something of great importance to the national gov, so there shouldn't be any state laws that are harmful to the execution of the national laws. Because the national laws are always greater than the state laws. Last is Hernandez versus Texas. Hernandez was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison by an all-white jury. He tried to say that wasn't fair because they excluded people of Mexican descent from even being allowed to serve on the jury. Then a Texas appeals court said that Mexicans are not a special case under the 14th Amendment, so they don't need equal protection rights. Then it came to us and we were like, oh yeah, they are a special case under the 14th Amendment. And we said the 14th Amendment applies to all races. That's it. See you next time. The Supreme Court of Eisenhower's presidency gets an A. Brown versus the Board of Education 1 got rid of separate but equal because that was inherently unequal.
I would give Congress an A. They admitted 2 states and helped protect the environment with the Multiple-Use Sustained Yield Act of 1960. They also helped create a lot of infrastructure that is vital to transportation still today. One of the biggest accomplishments that I think makes the Congress worthy of an A is the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which protects voter rights.
Upheld the Supremacy Clause in Pennsylvania versus Nelson, with the Federal Smith Act being greater than PA's Sedition Act. Finally, they defined unauthorized versus authorized deprivation of rights. So overall, they get an A for making sure that all races were equal under the 14th Amendment, upholding the Supremacy Clause, and defining deprivation of rights.
Overall, I'd give President Dwight Eisenhower a big old B+ on his presidency. He was able to accomplish many of the things that he debated in the elections, such as keeping us out of war and also improving civil rights. He does lose a few points for the U2 debacle and almost causing some scuffles there, but overall he had a pretty nice presidency, and that's why he gets his rating of a B+.
I would give Congress an A. They admitted 2 states and helped protect the environment with the Multiple-Use Sustained Yield Act of 1960. They also helped create a lot of infrastructure that is vital to transportation still today. One of the biggest accomplishments that I think makes the Congress worthy of an A is the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which protects voter rights.